Michelle, you're on mute.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, I know my computer's being very finicky today, so my apologies. Does anybody want to share a successful compensation or model that's worked for your agency? High level on us, I have 30% union here. So it's a little more complicated than everybody else as far as equity or the agencies that don't have a union, because we have to abide by the contract. So it gets a little more touchy, and especially when it comes to pay scales and goes to benefits, because we have to abide by their contract. So it's a little more complicated. So I'd love to hear someone has a successful model that they've worked with, as well as how many staff. And one of the comments that Joy shared is, there's such a disparity between management or senior management and your direct line staff, and how do you manage that? Because I've had my staff come in and say, your 990 shows you make this much, so why should I listen to anything you have to say? So I think that's a common thing. The other thing we've done this year for the first time is we've given everybody a total comp statement. So you guys haven't done that. It might be something to look into, and if someone doesn't know what that is, I'm more than happy to share on that as well. But I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts, comments, and where we can help you guys succeed and or make changes as a group. I think I'm opening the floor up to whoever wants to jump in. Be great.
I think for us, being in California, I mean, we've been doing pay statements for years through our payroll provider, Paycom. I think for us, the compensation and the challenges is being in the Bay Area, in terms of our competition, in terms of technology, high tech. So that's where we struggle, in terms of being competitive. So we actually recently just signed on with salary.com. We used to have pay scale, but they're terrible. In terms of like building out our compensation model. We have one and we put one in place, but it's old and we now need to revise it. And because our competition is like Facebook and Google and Apple and all that, we have it. That's our challenge, is cost of living and keeping up with comp. But we're hoping to use salary.com to help us meet those thresholds, even as a nonprofit.
How many people use benchmarking to help determine the pay scales or the pay grades for your agencies based upon comparable size JCCs like in your region? Is anybody, or do you guys typically just do like salary.com or?
I'm in Portland, Oregon, and we don't really have, I think one of the challenges is the comparables to cities with a similar cost of living are so different in size than we are. We're much smaller. So I've gone to use the benchmarking, but it hasn't proven to be very useful without a lot of like reverse mathematics.
So to answer the question about pay statements, most of the payroll providers have a total comp statement that you can pull down from their from like one of the modules. Usually it's an HR module or a payroll module inside of their system. That being said, you have to be able to have your benefits and costs of everything all loaded into the system. So if you have a full-blown HRIS system, most of them have something. We're on UKG Ready, and I just go into total comp statements and it generates them all. I know Paycom does it. I know ADP does it. I think most of the platforms do. It just may be a conversation with your rep or with like their service team to say, hey, where do I find this? And I'd like to provide it to my staff. I just think it's a useful tool because I see what's included in the total comp package. I'm sorry, I didn't hear whoever was speaking.
Echo.
Okay, so I think that's really important because it shows them, payroll and taxes and benefits and like 403Bs or like any other programs that you pay for. If you gross up any of the discounts you have, like we do for here, like, so if they get an early childhood discount or they get a camp discount, it shows all of those benefits included there to get a total amount of what their actual compensation is with the agency. So I think it's a useful tool if you haven't used it. How do you guys deal with like the inequities that people feel? Any suggestions? Whether they're valid or not, right? Like in our minds, right? But obviously in staff's minds, it does matter. Or they feel it. I hear it across probably HR person I speak to, right?
It's a
Like, how do you,
It's a challenge, especially like in California, right, where you have to post rates. When you're posting a job, you have to post the salary. And so that's another level of pressure that we're feeling in terms of on the salary thresholds, in terms of what we have to pay versus what we can afford. It's a very challenging situation, especially being in the Bay Area, where cost of living is high.
no, and I totally agree, but you guys put out there like the perks that like other businesses may or may not have into your job, you know,
Oh, yeah, we
app
talked-
as well,
we-
okay?
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned the free membership and this and that, but while it helps, it really comes down to wages, just because the housing in the Bay Area is insane. I mean, I can't tell you how many people live at home in the area. There's people on our street in the JCC, there's people living in RVs. It's just.
No,
it's
I
like
get it.
a world.
Yeah, I think that's nationally, right, a challenge. And how do we compensate for that? Because typically nonprofits pay less than for-profit agencies. I came from a for-profit, so I get all of this. You know, not everybody's mission-based, that it doesn't matter to them, or it's not a retirement job for everybody, or it's not a, you know, so how do we, you know, find a way to manage those inequities? And I will share with you, I get a lot of pushback if I don't put our rates on our job recs here in Ohio. Am I required? No, but certain sites do. So the jewishjobs.coms do, JCCA does. So there's enough places, depending upon where you post, that your salary's out there, people look, right? So I think that, you know, overcoming those challenges and finding ways to, I mean, do any of us do like referral bonuses? Do we do sign-on bonuses? Do we do, you know, what else do we do to get creative as far as compensation? Is, you know, to remain legally compliant, but also realizing that we have limitations based upon our financial burden. I know we do here, you know.
We give Amazon gift cards for referrals, but it's like a peanut, it's, $25 for a part-time referral, $50 for like somebody who is hired into a full-time position, but like the feedback we get is, well, our other agency next door gives $200 or $500. It's like, it's so frustrating. I actually had a question. I'm curious as to who else in the room is in the room for the salary bands discussion, because I'm not in those talks. I'm not part of the budgeting. I'm not in it. So how can I exercise any authority over salary band input if I'm not invited or allowed in the room? I'm curious who is in the room.
So how many people in your HR department is anybody represented from your team?
You asking me?
Yes, my clarifying question, like, 'cause you're saying you're not in the room. Is somebody else from HR in the room? Is there somebody?
My supervisor, CFO. I mean, the CFO being the supervisor of the HR person just feels a little bit contradictory, but yeah, I mean, all the chiefs, CEO, COO, CFO, CPO.
I mean, one thing that prior to 2 years ago, so my first two, I've been here about 3.5, almost 4 years. My first year and a half, it was stay in your lane, don't worry about it, we got this. And I was like, how can you do this when the biggest expense, or one of the biggest expenses, is our people, right? How are you freezing us out? Then you want us to hold, you know, everybody accountable. So I went then behind the scenes and created a roadmap of what I thought would be helpful, and shared it with them prior to their knowing when their meetings were gonna be, and said, I understand that for whatever reason, you don't feel value in me being in that room, but this is what I think you need to be aware of, and this is what I'm hearing on the streets, and this is what I'm having a hard time recruiting and retaining for. What can we do? And we went back and changed some of our stuff based upon that, to having 3 weeks of paid vacation versus 2. We went and did other things to try to get people in the door and try to keep them in the door, right? So I think you have to kind of get backwardly aggressive in some ways, in the sense of, hey, this is what I'm experiencing on a day-to-day basis. This is what I've learned. These are my suggestions for whatever they're worth. I'd love for you to like spend some time talking to me about it, or at least consider them. And then now the last 2 years I've been in the room, and it's been like very beneficial for me to hear all the conversation that they're hearing versus what I'm hearing, and being able to contribute in a leadership strategic way, but I think it's just sometimes, you know, taking that extra step to showing, you know, what the knowledge base you have may or may not work. Anybody else have any suggestions?
Sorry, can you, suggestions for what specifically? Sorry.
She's not in the room for when they talk pay scales or budgeting for salaries or roles or, and has things that she feels are important to share, and she's not being heard.
They actually hear what I hear. Like, it's just that my input is not invited, and I'm actually curious as to who else in this Zoom is part of the conversation when figuring out pay scales and recalibrations and bands, like the salary end of the budget items.
I've been in this role for 6-ish years, and I would say similarly in the beginning, I wasn't intentionally part of it, but or I was part of it, but at a point where decisions were already kind of close to being made. And so I now constantly track, not every role because don't have that time, but a lot of the areas where there are concerns, so that I have the information, whether it's just like Indeed notifications, that sort of thing. So I constantly have information, and I'm constantly sending it along, so that it's in people's minds earlier, and I somehow just eventually became part of it. Because it wasn't ever an intentional, like, this is my plan, I'm gonna get in, but it, like, having the information proactively showed the value, because it really originally is it's the CFO who's like, this is what we've got, this is what we're doing, and then the process has kind of shifted ever since then. So like, we're working on our budgets for starting July 1st, and so that's like what we're doing now, is looking at where we are for most of our positions compared to local similar organizations, even though there aren't, a ton, depending on what the role is. That helps.
My boss, she's the chief people officer. Her and the senior management team meet every week, and they talk about all this stuff, budgets, hiring. I'm not involved, but she is. Every week.
How transparent are you all with your staff as far as like pay scales and rates? Cause that's what I always get here is like, you guys don't share with us what the scales are. You don't share, you're not transparent with us, and how is our department less important than the other departments, and you know, those kinds of conversations. How are you managing the transparency issue as far as pay scales and pay grades amongst the agency?
So in California, before it was a requirement, we had pay scales, but it was more for internal use only, and we created a grid and the spread and all that. Now, by law, if someone asks for the pay scale, we have to give it to them, but we're very careful on how we do it and so forth. But salary information is all over the place in the state of California, so don't be surprised if other states are gonna start doing it as well.
We are the
Can I
opposite.
just,
All right. Mhm.
no, that's okay. I was just going to say, I'm in the same situation as you are, Lisa. So I'm on the outside looking in, and I'm hoping to use this session as an information gathering for me, so that I can certainly make a case for being at the table with our folks. Our CEO is resistant to grades and ranges, so we don't have those. And I'm trying to make an argument for that, because our team sits in May and makes decisions about what the increases are going to be across the board, and then politely gives me the information on, to input for June 1st. And then, when I have objections or questions, then I've got to address those individually. So we don't have a system for managing merit increases. And then certainly don't have the system for doing grades and ranges. So I'm stuck.
And to echo everything Cynthia just said, not only am I stuck, it's it's transparently opaque. Not only is it squashed upon to say, what do you mean people are discussing salaries? This is their personal business that should not be a topic for discussion. So like that environment is what the upper management will communicate while everybody else is still comparing paychecks.
So I want to share with you, we've got about 30 seconds before you can stay in here, which is great, or you could switch over and listen to the benefits side and have a conversation about benefits as well. So in case you didn't get that, if you want to, leave and go to the other room or vice versa, now is the time to do that. And then there's several, if you look online too, and I can send out samples too if you didn't see it, but there are total samples all over the place online as well. And I know that Cynthia offered to send them out or at least one of them offered to send it out. To send them out.
Welcome back, everyone. We see you entering this main room. We're going to give you the option of picking a room again. You can go back into the same conversation that you were just having, or you could choose the other topic. And Michelle and Ashley are going to stay in the rooms where they were and continue the conversation. So Sawyer is going to give us that opportunity to choose now, and then we'll see you in a little while.
Hello, everybody. A couple of you were with me the last 15 or so minutes, and we started a big conversation about the best way to be for compensation if we provide total comp statements to our employees and the value of doing so. We talked about some of the challenges about being competitive in the market with our compensation, and do we post our rates when we post a position, as well as how are we equitable and transparent with our teams when they come to you and say, in upper management on the 990s, we looked it up, you make this much, why do I make $20,000, for example? So that's kind of where our conversation's gone. I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking, questions you have, how you utilize pay scales, benchmarking, any of those kinds of things. As we continue this conversation, I want to open up for it to all of you.
I just recently joined the JCC that I met in February, but I'm told that we just went through a whole benchmarking and getting into salary bands. I actually worked here before, like 10 years ago, and we didn't have that. So coming back, it was nice that it came from a situation where staff hadn't gotten raises in several years, and now they kind of we took the low-hanging fruit, brought people up to at least like a specific level. Of course, people, still complain because it's like, oh, well, this, 10% increase doesn't make up for the last 7 years. I mean, you're gonna get all that, but for the most part, they've taken, they've brought the compensation, kind of to a level that we can be competitive. The interesting thing though, in New York, and I don't know if the other states, there's a law passed last year that we have to list our salary ranges when we place advertisements. And I actually like that because first it was, you can't ask anyone what they make. So that was actually a huge adjustment for me when I was doing recruitment. But then we couldn't ask it. So then you would just ask people what they wanted. So that was fine. And then now you have to post the salaries. And at first it's like a little strange, but I like it now because it cuts, first of all, from a recruitment standpoint, like it cuts off a lot of people that applying for $60,000 job and say they want 90. They're just gonna, not apply. So that helps. And then also when people try to negotiate higher, you know, it's like, well, this is our range, like this is what we told you, and like we can't go higher. So like from a recruitment standpoint, I think sometimes it's helpful. And then I think the staff like it because they kind of some more like pay transparency a bit. So I don't know like what you guys do and like what, because I know all the different states have different laws.
Well, when you post a salary, because we started doing it, and in Ohio, we're not required to yet, but we have, because so many of the JCC sites and the Jet Lab sites, a lot of the sites that you would use to post require it, so we just post it
Oh.
now everywhere.
Mhm.
But that being said, though, the issue I have is people that come in my office, well, you know, you're posting $17 to $19 an hour and I make 16, right? Like, and making sure that when we post stuff, we're being cognizant of the fact of the pay grades and the salaries that people are currently at, and how are we getting them to at least that minimum level, you know, to retain staff that you currently have. So I think
Right.
that's some of the challenges I keep hearing is like, how are we, you know, updating bands and all that? And
Mhm.
part of that we have to look at every year, because currently all we do here is COLA increases. We don't do performance, right? So everyone gets a straight percentage beginning of each fiscal year. I'm a big proponent of changing that, as is the CFO here, but for right now, that's what we have. And we have a union here too for 30% of our staff, so it makes it a little more complicated. But so it's kind of where we are, but like, where's everybody else? Like, what are your challenges when it comes to compensation or transparency, or, you know, working with your teams and staying within the budgets? And
We actually do it a little different, I think opposite almost than you guys, because it sounds like you guys are utilizing banding. We had looked at it, but the way that we actually kind of addressed a lot of those issues was by doing re-evaluating and redoing the entire annual review process. So that was a big lift for us a couple of years ago, because we were running into that too, right? Where I haven't had a review in 3 years, and we were like, what? So now the HR department tracks that, and we do behavioral interviews, and those are directly tied to increases. I know some places monitor, so they do that like 1-1, everyone gets an increase. For us, we space it out so that kind of temper, you know, if you're getting a raise in November because that's your anniversary, we're not 10 months of the year that we're saving that kind of money on the back end. That to me has kind of stemmed a lot of the concerns and issues on I haven't had a raise, I'm below what you guys are posting. We have very clear pay scales for like our ELS teachers. We did a big audit to make sure that we're competitive in the environment, but we haven't moved to banding. It's something I've looked at, but it's the performance review end, I think, has actually solved a lot of those issues for us. We do require under Colorado law to post salary ranges. Quite bluntly, I would probably continue doing that anywhere regardless. I never had that be a bad thing on our end. Like Randy was saying, I think that we've done a lot of confusion in the back and forth negotiation. So that's kind of where we have approached that.
anybody else want to share anything on what you guys are doing for compensation at your JCC, or the philosophy behind compensation and budgeting? We went to this year, we gave our CFOs changed it up a little bit and said, you know what? I don't care how you get there. This is this is where your bottom line has to be. So if you want to increase your rates you charge, if you want to increase your staff wages, if you want to do whatever you want to do to get to this bottom line within reason, we'll review it. I'm not going to tell you how to get there, because they're like, we want to give our staff more increases and we want this. And she's like, figure it out, right? Like, then where are you cutting or what are you increasing? And you want to add a body, then where's it going to go and how are you compensating it for? So I think that we've tried to provide, as a leadership team here, some more autonomy for them to run their departments and to be accountable. And if it doesn't work, it's on you, right? Like, you created it. So I don't know what you guys are doing there as far as, you know, that kind of freedom within the range of what the scope of, you know, this is how much you have for salaries, right? And how you get there, right? Just because we're tired of hearing, I need another body. Well, not always adding another body makes something 100% better, right? So look at the whole picture. We're trying to push them to that direction.
You know, our increase, from what I'm told, the last couple of years, it's just been a straight COLA. But a lot of that was just kind of getting people back in line with what they're and adjustments as needed. But that all comes from finance. Like the COLA is like, I think last year it was like 4%, the year before was 5%, and that was it, and everyone got it. So I personally, I prefer where finance will say, okay, you have 5% for increases, and then you can determine within that. So the 5% for your department would translate into a number. And then you can decide, okay, my high performers, I'm going to give 8%, someone that's just, standard doing their job, 3%. And if you're unsatisfactory in a review, you probably should be working there. But, regardless of that, like you wouldn't get an increase. Because I think that, there's both ways. Because it's like, if you're just no matter how hard you work, there's, going to be people who don't really overextend themselves and they're getting the same increases. So you have that type of issue. So, it's always a struggle.
We're
That's-
looking to go to and say, like, for next year is the goal. Everyone gets a COLA increase, but you have up to 1 or 2 or 3% more based upon their performance and based upon how the performance review comes in, to kind of have a so-called balanced perhaps approach to it. So, but that way people that are performing well are getting a little bit more than people that are performing, they're just gonna get their COLA, right? If you're just
Yeah.
skating by, you're getting your COLA, and if your review is less than satisfactory, then you're being put on a PIP.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a great compromise. Because then you're keeping the wages at least kind of with the standard of living. So when you do have to replace, it's not like you're so underpaid. But I think that's a good compromise.
So if I could chime in, and I apologize, I arrived late. I was at a meeting that ran longer than I expected. So I do apologize that I did not hear the conversations from the beginning. I'm the CEO of RJCC here in New Jersey. And so I guess I come at it from a little bit different perspective than some others. We had a period of a few years before I became CEO when the reviews of staff were done no more frequently than every 2 years. Number one. Number two, there had been a period that surrounded COVID where at the time that I moved into the CEO's role, we had staff that had not received any salary increment for as long as 4 to 5 years. And number three, we realized and determined that we had a number of people that needed to be brought up to what we considered more appropriate market for the work that they were doing. And I had plans on bringing on some new staff, changing some staff. And the reality is, as we all know, the market today is not what it was some years ago. And also in part because there were some people that were here with significant longevity. And you could have someone who worked 20 some odd years and now was making $50,000 or $60,000. To replace that person, you couldn't pay them the same amount of money. The market is just different. So we had all of those things, and we addressed them from a budgetary standpoint, and we made a number of new hires, and we really elevated people, and so forth and so on. But having said that, we're a small JCC. We're a few $1 million budget, and I and my chief financial officer, we're HR. Okay, I don't have an HR director. I don't have a separate department. We're HR, as well as my director of operations. So at the end of the day, while there are different directors that do a hiring or at least are part of that process, at the end of the day, I and my operations director, depending upon the position, are the ones that will determine compensation. And frankly, I don't necessarily, again, sitting in the seat I sit in, I have made it very clear to my staff and to my board of directors. compensation is not something for which I am transparent beyond what the budgeting, what, you know, budgetary requirements. I don't, if I am the final arbiter of a new employee's salary or an existing employee's raise who reports to somebody else, I do handle that, and their supervisor does not necessarily know what their compensation is or what raise I gave them. That is my call. As long as it works within our board approved budget and our cash flow and our cash management processes, that is my call. And I don't believe in that, in the appropriateness of that transparency, in large part because, number one, I think there are confidentiality and sensitivity issues. And number two, as a JCC, at least our JCC, again, we're a smaller JCC, you know, and we're all community organizations. Jewish community centers are community organizations. Many of the people who work here live in a set of communities around each other. They know each other. They see each other around. It is not necessarily one person's business what somebody else's compensation is. And I think that those things tend to create more problems. And I will tell you, I have almost never gotten any backlash from either a member of my board or a member of my staff as to not knowing, not being transparent, so to speak, in terms of someone's compensation. I've never experienced it.
You know, the interesting thing about that though, like I grew up in HR, like in the same type of situation where there was no salary transparency. Like we didn't talk about salaries. No one knew what they made. And I always that was kind of how I was comfortable and how I did for many, many years. But starting a few years ago, and I don't know if it's because I'm in New York, people just talk. So like they just talk, and they would come in and I'd be shocked that everyone knew what everyone was making. And like, so now with this, like now with all this transparency, like 10 years ago, I would have been like, oh my God, now I guess I'm used to it. But like, I would never tell anyone what I made, but they tell everyone. Like it was just, I found that fascinating. So I always kind of operate under the fact that people are going to talk. So anything that we do, like we have to be able to quote unquote, like I don't want to say defend it because that sounds too negative, but like there's a thought process behind it at least.
You know, it's interesting, Randy, that you say that, because that when I started here and certainly came into the role of CEO, that I was very upfront that instructing my staff, I don't accept your paycheck shouldn't be sitting out, this, that, and the other thing. It struck me how people talk about this stuff. And to a certain extent, it seems to me to be a generational thing.
Maybe, yeah.
But maybe I'm wrong, but that's the way it seems.
I think that's probably exactly what it is.
But I, like you, but I still try to adhere to, for I guess, a lack of transparency in that regard. But I have experienced what you described.
Yeah.
Yes, it's kind of, I would never have those discussions with anyone. But
so Randy, I don't mean to interrupt. We have 20 seconds to go back to the main room. Randy, if you wouldn't mind, or Adam, one of the two of you, or Matt, to like kind of report out what we've talked about, that'd be great. Or Cynthia, because I know that you were in both sessions, just for on behalf of this group. But I appreciate everyone's insight. And Adam, I see both sides of that, but unfortunately, all of our employees talk, especially our direct line staff. And they all know from maintenance what the teachers make the maintenance.
Everybody sing. Welcome, everyone.
Let's see, we're back up to 18 now.
There we go. Good.
Well, welcome back, everyone, from your rooms. I was in the room talking about benefits and just some challenges that go along with that. And we had a great conversation. You know, what do we do for the staff that what do we do for staff that don't utilize the discounts for kids is one challenge that we really talked about. Some things that we talked about doing for those staff is let's see, well, one JCC does offer free coffee and a 50% discount on their cafe. We talked about giving some sort of credit in our cafe for those staff, and also not also, but or maybe a credit towards our personal training where you could go get 4 sessions or something like that. And this would only be for somebody who isn't utilizing like the childcare discounts also. You would only get one or the other. But yeah, I mean, we talked about health insurance for 3B matches, offering pet insurance. That was one JCC that their staff utilizes that a lot. It is not paid for by the employer, but people really utilize that a lot. And something called, and also Legal Shield, I guess, is like Legal Lock. So yeah, that was just like kind of a high level of what we talked about in our room. Michelle, do you want to share what y'all talked about?
Sure, I thought, anybody from my room want to speak? Because if not, then I will, but I think that, we talked a lot about how compensation is different everywhere and the difference between being transparent and asking staff to keep their financial information to themselves versus everyone being so willing to share across lines. In other words, the teachers know what the maintenance people are making, the fitness service people know what this is making, to try and preserve confidentiality, but at the same time, we know that's difficult, and we know that some different states have different requirements as far as pay scales and pay banding and pay profiles. The big thing that came across that a lot of people weren't utilizing that they've learned that could be very helpful is a total compensation package report that each employee gets at the end of every year with their W-2 that shows them like their total comp, meaning their salaries for the year, their 403B employer contributions, the 403B, the medical contributions by the employer, could be the discounts that they've received for all the different programs into one comp package. Most of the HRIS systems out there do provide that. And it's a very useful tool where, they can see all in, not just, hey, I made 50,000, but when you add in all their benefits and everything else, maybe it's $70,000 or $72,000 worth of a salary. To give them a full picture is really helpful. And what am I missing? Anybody up from the room? I'm just trying to think, high level. I was listening more than taking notes, so I apologize. Also talking about increases and whether they're tied to performance reviews or not, or if they're simply COLA increases. And then how do we approach those? And the last thing that came up is when we hire new hires, ensuring that our current staff are within that pay range that are appropriate so that we don't lose key players, unless it's our intent to, have that person, make a decision on their own to stay with the organization or not. That's really high level. There's obviously a lot more to the conversation, but that's a high level view of, compensation from 10,000 feet. So I'm gonna pass it back to you, Julie, I believe.
Does anybody have any questions or any comments that they want to add that were part of the conversation, or something that they're doing at their JCC that you want to share?
Ashley, did you talk about our new program here at all or no?
I did not talk about it. If you want to give like a quick high level, because I don't know enough about it.
I'll give you a 30-second high level. We had our medical insurance come back this year with a 40% increase and almost fell off our chairs. And couldn't figure out what to do. So, and I'd reached out to different brokers throughout the year, knowing we were gonna have a rough renewal because we're in that 51 to 100 eligible, which is the worst market to be in. And said, what can we do? And we decided we're gonna stay with our current brokers. Then our renewal came in and I went, there's nothing creative here. So I went back to the 3 people we interviewed and said, you've got 48 hours to give me a solution that might be better. So we ended up, I think around 18 or 19, which is still high. But what we did is we added a supplemental insurance on top of our medical insurance. So we increased deductibles and we increased different parts of our plan. So that way it was an affordable for the agency as well as for the employee to absorb that increase. But we picked up something called Premium Savers, which is through AmFirst. And Morgan White is the insurance company behind it. That is like a supplemental insurance comparable to like a Medicare. So then people that have chose our PPO plans, not our HSA plans, our PPO plans got 2 cards this year. They have their main United Healthcare card, and they have the Premium Saver card, which is like their supplemental insurance, like a Medicare type card, that picks up the difference between the deductible, once you've reached the new higher deductible, and the maximum out-of-pocket expenses. So once they hit that, like those extra expenses are picked up for them by this other insurance if they would have to use it. So just want to share, like, just a creative way to do it. And the other thing we did is in those 2 weeks, we educated all of our staff that were Medicare eligible, that were refusing to go to Medicare, and we set them up with advisors, and we had meetings, and I was in part of them. They'd leave because I want to hear the HIPAA stuff and come back. And we got 8 of our 9 people to go to Medicare, which was a huge savings. In doing so, and we just offered an incentive to do it of $100 a year towards their, so they could get used to the Medicare Part B payment plan, just for the 1 year as an allowance. So just getting creative with benefits and compensation to make it work, for the times that we're in as medical insurance costs keep rising.
Thanks, Michelle.
We have a couple of announcements from JCC Association. Thank you all for being here. Stay through the announcements if you can, because you are the focus to all of your staff. You have your fingers on everybody across not literally, but you know who all your staff are. And so Sawyer's going to tell you a little bit about our scholarship program that your staff are eligible for.
Yeah, thank you, Joy. If you don't know about the Professional Development Scholarship Program, it is a scholarship program that JCC professionals exclusively can apply for through JCC Association. They can apply for up to $20,000 for a master's, a doctorate, or a certificate program that is relevant to their job and their growth. And they can also receive extra funding through our partner schools if they apply for a master's degree or a certificate program through one of our partner schools, which are listed on the JCC Resource Center. So I'm going to put the JCC Resource Center link to the application, which is now live to the scholarship program, in the chat here. And I also put my contact email. If anyone has any questions for me, they can reach out to me. And applications are now live, and the application deadline is May 10th. So if you have any of your staff that that want to get further education, this is a great opportunity for them to receive scholarship to make it more accessible. Yeah, thank you, Joy. Thank you, Joy.
So is this just for masters?
Master's, doctorates, and certificates. So not bachelor's or associate's degree.
I got my PHR through it. I just want to make sure everyone knew that. I paid for my PHR, so.
And continuing education points. So if anybody needs anything like that. So yeah.
I have a question. So I have my SPHR and I'm up for recertification and I need a bunch of courses. Can I apply for that?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that would be continuing education.
Oh, and so how do you do that? Just through that
Application?
Yeah, go to the application and you can apply. And we'll look through your application. After the deadline, there's a short interview. And then from there, we'll let you know if we're able to provide scholarship towards that program.
How many scholarships are available? Like, is this a lot or? So there is like a max budget that we have, but it can be, there's not a certain amount of scholarships that we can give out because, some degrees cost a lot more than like some certificate programs. Right. That's awesome.
Yeah.
and okay, that's great.
Yeah. Please spread the word to your staff. You can find out more information about that in the briefs and on JCC Resource Center. Hopefully your staff are reading the briefs. That's basically where all the information comes from about peer communities, about new opportunities, new cohorts that are starting. And speaking of peer communities, we have new communities forming, one for people who work in the adult realm and one for people who work in day camps. And we just started the aquatics peer community. So if you're finding this valuable, please let your staff know. They can find the calendars on the JCC Resource Center and check them out in the briefs. And so that brings us right to the top of the hour. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for the work that you do. I know you're the unsung heroes of the JCCs, and we really appreciate everything that you do. Thank you to Ashley and Michelle for the work that they do to be the chair people of this program. And thank you, Sawyer, for doing our behind the scenes tech. Have a
And
great
thank you, Joy.
day, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody. Bye.